Women do not understand land, Peck. They understand curtains and the price of tea and which of their neighbors has grown fat. But land is a matter of drainage and grade and law, and it wants a man's mind. So do not trouble me with fancies. Buy the water-meadow and have it done by Michaelmas. Julian, Duke of Thornaby, said this from the window of his estate room, with his back to his steward and his eyes upon the low grey country beyond the glass, and he was so entirely satisfied with the shape of the sentence that he did not at first observe the silence behind him. It was a particular sort of silence. It had the quality of a man holding a cold thing in his hands and wondering how to set it down. "Your Grace," said Peck at last, "you are still here. The water-meadow is sold." Julian turned. He was a tall man, dark, broad through the shoulder, and he had the trick, cultivated since boyhood, of turning slowly as though the world might do well to wait for his face. "Sold," he repeated in the tone of a man correcting a servant's grammar. "It cannot be sold. Ashmead has been in Crow's hands these 30 years, and Crow is in debt to me for the better part of it. He will sell to me or to no one. That is not sentiment, Peck. That is arithmetic." "He sold it a fortnight since," said Peck, who was a square, honest, unhappy man, and who had come to the estate room this morning knowing that some portion of the sky was about to descend upon him and preferring to have it done. "To a private purchaser. The deed is registered. I saw it copied at Halloway's own desk. Ashmead water-meadow, the mere below it, and the strip of alder car that runs down to the ford. All of it. Bought outright, and the mortgage to Crow discharged in the bargain, so there is no lever there to pull." For a moment the Duke of Thornaby said nothing, and the fire in the grate had the room to itself. He was doing, behind his still face, the thing he did best, which was to lay a plan upon a table in his mind and walk about it. The canal was the whole of the plan. 3 years he had spent upon it, and a great deal of money, and more of his pride than he would have admitted to any living soul. A cut of navigable water from the coalfield at Barrow's Edge, across the flat cars, joining the river above the town, so that the coal that now went by cart over ruined roads might go by barge cheap and clean, and the estate that carried it might grow rich in the tolls. It was a good plan. It was, he privately believed, a great one, the sort of thing his father had never had the vision to attempt. And the whole of it turned upon one thing, as a door turns upon one hinge. The low ground had to be drained before it could be cut, and it could not be drained without control of the water that stood upon Ashmead Meadow, because Ashmead sat at the throat of the whole valley, and whoever held Ashmead held the tap. "Who," said Julian very quietly, "has bought my meadow?" Peck looked at his boots. "Miss Sinclair, your Grace, of Marefield." "I do not know the name." "Old Mr. Sinclair's daughter. He died in the spring 12-month. The little estate over the river past the Ling. She has been running it since." "A woman?" "Yes, your Grace." Julian laughed. It was not a warm sound. It was the laugh of a man who has been told that the difficulty is smaller than he feared. "Then we have no difficulty at all," he said. "A gentlewoman does not want a water-meadow. She wants an income and a quiet life, and she has bought a wet field she cannot use because some agent flattered her into it. We shall relieve her of it at a profit to her purse and a saving to my temper. Go to her tomorrow. Offer her a third above what she paid." Women understand a bargain when it is put before them in coin. "I did go, your Grace." Peck said it in the voice of a man confessing. "This morning, before I came to you." "And she would not sell." "Then offer her a half above." "I offered her twice, your Grace, twice what she paid. She heard me out most civilly and gave me tea and said no." Something in the Duke's face changed by a degree. It was not yet anger. It was the first prickle of a thing he had not felt in a long while, which was surprise. "She refused twice her outlay, on a wet field. Did she give a reason?" Peck hesitated, and then, being an honest man to the last, gave it whole. "She said, your Grace, she said to tell you that she understood perfectly well why the meadow was worth so much to you, and that a thing worth twice its price to a duke was worth waiting upon, and that she was in no hurry. And she said—" Here Peck stopped. Finish it. She said she had heard your Grace's opinion of what women understand, and that she found it very useful to be underestimated, and hoped you would continue. The fire cracked. Beyond the window the low country lay under its gray coat, the mere gleaming like a dropped coin among the alders, and somewhere out upon it, on land that was now hers and not his, a heron stood in the shallows as still as a man thinking. Julian, Duke of Thornaby, discovered that he was no longer amused. "Have the horses put to," he said. "I shall call upon Miss Sinclair myself." Merfield was not what he had expected, and this annoyed him before he had so much as reached the door. He had expected a widowed sort of house, a place gone soft at the edges, ivy in the gutters and a garden let run, the honest decay of an estate that had outlived the man who understood it. Instead, the drive was raked. The hedges were laid, close and new, in the good old fashion that costs a man dear in labor and pays him back in 20 years. The gate at the yard swung true and latched of itself. There was money being spent here, but spent the way a careful farmer spends it, upon the bones of the place and not its face, and the Duke, who had an eye for such things whatever he thought of the sex that kept them, noted it with a displeasure he could not entirely name. He was shown into a plain, bright parlor by a manservant older than the house, and there he was made to wait, which he was not accustomed to, and which he understood after 4 minutes by the clock to be quite deliberate. When the door opened at last, it opened without hurry. Miss Arabella Sinclair was younger than he had supposed and less handsome than she was something else, though he could not at once have said what that something was. She was perhaps 25. She had a plain, clear, intelligent face, brown hair drawn up simply with a few strands escaped at the temple, as though she had been out of doors, and a pair of gray eyes that met his own without the least of that soft lowering he was used to seeing in women who found themselves suddenly in the same room as a duke. She wore a gown of good gray stuff, unadorned, the kind of dress a sensible woman wears to walk her own fields in, and her hands, he saw, though they were a lady's hands, had done work. "Your Grace," she said, and curtsied correctly no more. "Miss Sinclair." He did not sit, because to sit would be to concede that this was a visit and not an engagement. "You will know why I have come." "I imagine you have come about my meadow," said Arabella, and sat down herself composedly in the chair by the window, so that the gray light fell on his face and left hers a little in shadow, and the Duke understood that he had been out-generaled in the matter of seating before a single word of business had been spoken. "Will you take tea? Mr. Peck told me you were fond of arithmetic. There is a certain arithmetic to tea. It is cheaper than quarreling and it lasts longer." "I did not come to take tea." "No," she agreed. "You came to take Ashmead, but you may as well have the tea since you cannot have the other, and it seems a pity to waste the fire." He looked at her for a long moment. He was a man used to weather in a face when he chose to bring it, and he brought it now, the whole gray front of the house of Thornaby, and she received it as the mere below received the sky, without a ripple, and poured the tea. "Miss Sinclair," said Julian, taking the cup he had refused because to refuse it now would be to sulk, "let us not fence. You have bought a field you cannot want, at a price you cannot easily have afforded, and you have done it, I must suppose, because someone told you it lay in the path of my scheme and might be sold to me dear. It was cleverly done. I do not begrudge cleverness. But you are a young woman managing a small estate on your own, and you will forgive me if I observe that a small estate on its own has need of ready money, and that I am offering you a great deal of it. 2 times your outlay. 3, if you will have it settled today. Take it and buy yourself a herd or a husband or a season in town, and let a man get on with a man's work." He watched the last of it land. He had chosen the words for their edge. He was not a cruel man, but he was a proud one, and pride, when it is thwarted, reaches for the nearest weapon, and the nearest weapon to a duke is condescension. Arabella Sinclair did not flush. She set down her own cup and folded her hands, and she looked at him with something in her gray eyes that he would spend a good many weeks failing to forget, because it was not offense, and it was not fear, and it was not even dislike. It was amusement, the private, level amusement of a person who has been handed exactly the thing she was waiting for. "Your Grace," she said, "I will tell you what I understand, and then you may decide for yourself whether women understand land. I understand that your canal cannot be dug until the cars are drained. I understand that the cars cannot be drained until the water can be let down under control, and that the only place in this valley where the water may be taken and held and let go by the acre is Ashmead, because Ashmead sits at the neck of the fall, 3 feet above the mere and 11 below the ling, which I have measured myself, with a level, on a morning your Mr. Peck was surveying the far bank and did not think to look across the water. I understand that without Ashmead your 3 years and your good money are so much wet clay. And I understand here, for the first time she smiled, and it was not unkind, which was somehow worse, that a man who has told his steward and half the county that women do not understand land will find it very hard, very publicly hard, to come cap in hand to a woman for the one field he needs. That is what I understand. I have not offended you, I hope. You did ask." The clock ticked. The heron, out upon her water, took 2 slow steps and stood again. "You mean to make me pay," said Julian slowly. "I mean to make you ask," said Arabella. "The paying will follow, but the paying does not interest me nearly so much. More tea." He did not stay to finish it. He rose and he made his bow, which was correct to the inch, and he said at the door, with the last of the front still up, "You have mistaken me, Miss Sinclair, for a man who can be delayed. I have other means of coming at that water than through your field. I did not need to come here at all. I came out of courtesy." "Of course you did," she said, and rose to see him out. And at the door, quite gently, as one gives a traveler a true direction, she added, "Your Grace, the alder car floods first always, 3 days before the meadow. Old Mr. Crow used to watch the car and know when to move his beasts. I only mention it because your survey has the levels of the car wrong by 2 feet, and a canal engineer who has his levels wrong by 2 feet will dig a great deal of ditch and fill it all with the wrong water. But you have a man's mind for it, so I am sure you will manage." Julian, Duke of Thornaby, rode home through his own grey country at a pace that did his horse no credit, and he told himself the whole way that he was angry, and it was some miles before he was honest enough, even alone, even with no one to see, to admit that under the anger, like the water under the car, there ran something else entirely, and that the something else was that in 11 years of getting his own way he had not once been spoken to like that, and that he had not in 11 years once ridden home turning a single sentence of another person's over and over in his mind, the way he was turning hers. 2 feet. He would send a man to check the levels of the car in the morning, not because she was right, because a man verifies, that was all, that was the whole of it. The man came back the next day with his hat in his hands and his eyes anywhere but on the Duke's, and reported that the levels of the car were wrong upon the survey, by rather more than 2 feet. Julian stood a long while at the window of the estate room after the man had gone, looking out at the mere, and at the alders, and at the small grey field at the neck of the valley that was the hinge of everything he wanted and that belonged, deed and mere and heron and all, to a woman who had poured him tea, and told him the truth, and let him ride away thinking he had lost only a field. "Peck," he said, "Your Grace, what manner of woman is she?" Peck, who had served the Duke's father before him and had a countryman's license in his silences, considered this for a while. "The kind, Your Grace," he said at last, "that old Mr. Sinclair trusted with the whole of it before he died, and was right too. There's not a tenant on her land would hear a word against her, and not a dealer at the fair would try her twice. She reads the market like her Bible, and she pays her people on the day, and when the marsh flooded 2 winters back it was her carts out first, not the parish's. That manner of woman. You might have told me that before I offered to buy her a husband." "I might, Your Grace," Peck agreed, with the ghost of something that in a bolder man would have been a smile, "if Your Grace had asked before instead of after." The Duke turned from the window. For the first time in a long while, and much against his will, the corner of his own hard mouth moved. "Send to Halloway," he said. "I want everything the law knows about Ashmead and everything it knows about Marefield and everything it knows about Miss Arabella Sinclair. If I am to be beaten by a woman, Peck, I will at least know the woman who beats me. And find me the county's best man with a level. Ours, it seems, cannot be trusted to measure his own boots." "Yes, your grace," said Peck, and went, and did not quite manage to be out of the room before the Duke saw him smile. Halloway, the solicitor, came out to Thornaby 3 days later with a leather case under his arm and a careful expression upon his long face, and he spread the whole of the matter upon the great library table, while the Duke stood over it with his hands clasped behind his back. "The estate is called Marefield," Halloway said, "though it is smaller than the name suggests. Some 600 acres, well kept, unencumbered. That is the remarkable thing, your grace. It carries no debt at all, which for an estate of that size in these years is nearly unheard of. Old Mr. Sinclair was a careful man, and his daughter is more careful still. She has the management of it entirely. There is no brother, no trustee, no husband. The father broke the entail before he died. It seems he foresaw the difficulty of leaving a landed daughter unprotected, and chose to protect her with the one thing the law cannot easily take from a woman, which is the freehold itself, given outright." "And Ashmead, how did she come at it?" "Cleverly, your grace, and legally, and there is nothing in it you can undo." Halloway drew out a paper. "Crow was in debt, as you say, but not chiefly to you. He was in debt to the bank at Barrow's Edge, and the bank was pressing, and your grace's habit of waiting upon a man until he must sell cheap is a habit that is, if I may say so, tolerably well known in this county. Miss Sinclair went to Crow before your Mr. Peck did. She paid the bank in full, took the discharge, bought the field at a fair price and no more, and made Crow a present of the difference between the fair price and the ruin your grace had planned for him. He blesses her name in the alehouse nightly. So you see she has not only the field. She has the good will of the man you meant to break, and the story of it, and the story is not one that reflects, forgive me, to your grace's advantage." Julian looked at the paper for a long time. "She anticipated me," he said. "At every step she knew what I would do before I did it." "It would appear so, your grace." "How?" Halloway coughed. "Your grace's methods are consistent. A consistent man is a legible man. Miss Sinclair, I am told, reads ledgers the way other young ladies read novels and finds them fuller of incident." The Duke of Thornaby was not a man who enjoyed being called legible, and he liked still less the small, ignoble truth at the bottom of it, which was that he had grown so used to winning that he had stopped troubling to be unpredictable. He had bullied and waited and outspent his way across this valley for 11 years, and it had worked so unfailingly that his methods had worn a groove, and a clever neighbor had merely put her cart in the groove ahead of him and let him push it. "There is another way to the water," he said. "There must be. Show me the levels." They worked until the candles were lit, he and Halloway and the new engineer, a dry Scot named Ferrier whom Peck had found and who had no opinions about anything but water, which the Duke found restful. And there was another way. It was uglier and dearer, and it meant taking the canal in a long loop north of the mere and lifting the water by a series of locks it would not otherwise have needed, and it meant buying 2 more fields and a right-of-way across a third, and it added, by Ferrier's flat estimate, some £11,000 to a scheme already swollen past its first budget. But it did not touch Ashmead. It went round her. "Do it," said Julian. "Your grace," said Peck unhappily, 11,000. "I did not ask the cost, Peck. I asked it to be done. I will not have it said that the Duke of Thornaby could not dig a ditch across his own valley without the leave of a woman with a level, buy the fields, quietly, and say nothing of the loop to anyone until the deeds are signed. He should have known better. He came to understand, much later, that he had known better even then, and had done it anyway, because pride is a poor engineer and lays its levels by the heart. The 2 fields he needed for the northern loop were Ferny Close and the Long Ing, both held by tenants of a neighboring landowner, and the neighboring landowner was Sir Rowland Vane, and Sir Rowland Vane was a smiling, florid, grasping man who had wanted a piece of the canal's profit for himself these 3 years, and had never been able to get his hands upon one. When the Duke's agents came quietly to buy Ferny clothes in the Long Ing, Sir Rowland understood at once, being grasping, that they must be wanted very much, and he raised his price and raised it again. And when the Duke's agents came back a fourth time, Sir Rowland smiled his florid smile and told them the fields were no longer for sale, because he had that morning agreed to lease them, the both of them on a long and binding lease, to Miss Arabella Sinclair of Marefield. Julian heard this in his estate room with the grey country at the window, and he did not throw anything, and he did not raise his voice, and Peck, watching him, thought that the stillness was a great deal worse. "She has taken the loop," said the Duke. "She has leased the fields the loop must cross, your grace. Sir Rowland let them go to her gladly, she paid him well, and he is no friend to us. She has not the water, and now she has the way round the water. Whichever road you take to the canal, your grace, it seems it runs through Miss Sinclair's parlor." "How did she know of the loop?" "I told no one. You Halloway farrier and myself, 4 men." Peck was quiet. Then, "She did not need to be told, your grace. She knew there was another way because she'd measured the valley same as farrier. And she knew that a proud man who'd been beaten at Ashmead would sooner spend £11,000 than come and ask. She didn't outwit your scheme, your grace. She outwit," he stopped and finished it low, "she reckoned on your temper, begging your pardon." There it was again, legible, consistent. A man so certain of his own mind that his mind had become a thing another person could hire like a horse and drive where she pleased. He rode to Marefield that afternoon without sending word. She was not in the parlor this time. The old manservant, with an apology, led him out and round the back of the house, past a dairy scrubbed to the whiteness of bone, past a barn where a girl was turning cheeses, and out to a low gate that gave upon the fields, and there was Miss Arabella Sinclair in an old brown habit and a man's broad hat, standing with a rough grey woman at her side over the body of a fallen ewe, her sleeves turned back and her hands and forearms bloodied to the elbow. And she was easing a wet lamb into the straw with the unhurried competence of a person who has done it 100 times and will do it 100 more. She looked up at him across the dead ewe and the living lamb, and she did not apologize for her state, and she did not color, and the Duke of Thornaby, who had come to say a great many cold and cutting things, found that every one of them had left him. "Your Grace," she said, "you have caught me at lambing, and out of season 2 this one lost her mother, and I have been sitting up with the orphan. You will forgive me if I do not curtsy, my hands are not fit for it. Have you come about the fields, or have you come to shout? Either is welcome, only I must get this lamb to the fire first, or your errand and my afternoon will both be wasted." "I have come," said Julian, and found to his own surprise that his voice had lost its front, "to ask how you knew about the loop." Arabella wrapped the lamb in a sacking cloth, and gave it to the grey woman with a quiet word, and wiped her arms on a rag, and only then did she straighten and look at him properly. "I did not know about your loop, your grace," she said. "I knew about the water. Water does not care whose scheme it is. It runs downhill and it stands where the ground is low, and there are only 2 ways to take a canal across this valley, and God laid them both out long before either of us was born. I have Ashmead, which commands the first way. When you did not come to me for Ashmead, I knew you had chosen the second, because a proud man always chooses the dearer road if the cheaper one has a woman standing in it. So I leased the fields on the second road. I did not read your mind, your grace. I read your character. It is written rather larger." He should have been angry. He was a little. But under the anger, for the second time, there was that other thing, and this time he was honest enough to know it while it was happening, and what it was this, that in the whole of his life no one had ever taken the trouble to understand him so exactly, and that being understood, even to his cost, even by an adversary with a lamb's blood on her arms, was a sensation so unfamiliar and so unexpectedly warm that it frightened him. "You have me boxed," he said slowly. "Ashmead on the one road, the loop on the other. I cannot dig my canal without you." "No," she agreed, "you cannot." Then name your terms. And here Arabella Sinclair did the thing that undid him more thoroughly than any refusal could have done. She laughed not unkindly, not in triumph, but with a real and rueful warmth, and she leaned on the low gate and looked out over the gray valley they were both fighting for, and she said, "I have no terms, your grace. Do you know, I think that is what has vexed you most, though you have not seen it yet. You keep waiting for me to name my price, because a price is a thing you understand, a price is a lever, a price can be met. Once a thing is bought, a man may despise the seller and keep the goods. But I did not buy Ashmead to sell it back to you, dear. I bought it because your canal, dug your way, would drain the cars and flood the low commons where 60 families graze their beasts, and take the water off Merefield's own meadows in a dry summer, and I could not stop it in the county court, because the court belongs to men like you, so I stopped it in the only place a woman may. I bought the ground it must stand on. That is my term. Dig your canal so that it does not ruin the people who cannot buy fields to defend themselves, and I will sell you Ashmead for what I paid, and lease you the loop for a peppercorn, and you may have your barges and your tolls and your greatness and welcome. Dig it your way over the commons, and I will fight you at every gate and every ford and every level until we are both old. Those are not terms, your grace. That is simply the shape of the thing. You have only to see it." The heron rose off the mere behind her, gray against the gray sky, and beat away slowly toward the alders, and the Duke of Thornaby stood at the low gate of a small estate he had meant to overawe, and understood that he had come to buy a field and been offered, instead, a mirror. "You could have told my steward this," he said at last. "You could have told me at the first over the tea. Why did you let me spend 3 days and a great deal of temper finding the loop, if you meant all along to make me a fair offer?" Arabella considered him. The escaped strand of hair had come loose at her temple again, and she pushed it back with the inside of her wrist, since her hands were not clean, and something in the small, ordinary gesture went through the Duke like the first cold of a coming frost. "Because," she said, "you would not have listened. 3 days ago you were a man who knew that women did not understand land. You had to lose to me twice before you would ride out here yourself and ask me a question and wait for the answer. You are asking now. That is worth the 3 days, your grace. That is worth a great deal more than 3 days. Now will you come in and have your tea while I see to my lamb, and we will talk about your canal like two people who own the 2 halves of it. For that, I find, is what we are." He went in. He did not, on the ride home, turn a single sentence of hers over in his mind, for the excellent reason that he did not stop turning them over at all, but held them all together, the whole afternoon, like a man carrying water in his 2 hands, careful not to spill. And when Peck asked him that evening whether they were to fight Miss Sinclair or to treat with her, the Duke of Thornaby was a long time answering, and when he answered he did not sound like a man who had lost. "We are to build a canal, Peck," he said. "It seems there is more than one mind in this valley fit to build it. I had better get used to the other one. Send to Marefield in the morning. Ask Miss Sinclair, ask her, Peck. Do not tell her whether she will do me the honor of walking the low ground with me on Thursday and bringing her level. Mine, it seems, is not to be trusted." The invitation to walk the low ground was carried across the river the next morning by Peck himself, on foot, because the Duke had said, without quite knowing why he said it, that a thing asked as a favor should not be sent by a groom as though it were an order. And Peck, who had views on the education of dukes, and had waited some years to see this particular pupil begin his lessons, was glad enough of the walk. He came back after noon with Miss Sinclair's answer, which was that she would be honored, and would bring 2 levels, one for herself and one for his grace, since his grace's own had lately been found wanting, and she did not like to see a man work with poor tools. And Peck delivered this with such a careful absence of expression that the Duke of Thornaby looked at him hard and said, "You are enjoying this, Peck." And Peck said, "I am nearly 70, your grace, and I have buried a wife and 2 masters and my own best mare, and a man of my years must take his pleasures where the Lord provides them," and went away to see about the horses before the Duke could think of a reply. But there was a matter that could not wait for Thursday, and it was the mill. The old mill stood at the ford, where the beck ran shallow over stone and the one hard road crossed to the town, and it had ground the valley's corn since before anyone's grandfather, and it was held, mill and race and the ancient water rights that went with it, by Tom Aldous, a big, slow, careful man whose family had been millers there for 5 generations, and who understood water in his own unlettered way, as well as Ferrier understood it with all his instruments. And the mill was a difficulty, because the canal, dug on any line at all, must take water from the beck above the ford, and the miller's ancient right was to the whole flow of that beck, undivided, as it had run to his wheel since the reign of kings no one remembered. And no canal could be cut without buying or bending or breaking that right. And the Duke of Thornaby, in the first proud draft of his scheme, 3 years gone, had written the miller down as a small obstacle to be removed at law, and had not thought of him since. He thought of him now, because a deputation of the town came to Thornaby that afternoon, the parson, and 2 of the chief tenants and Tom Aldous himself, turning his hat in his big hands in the great hall as though it were a thing he had caught and did not know how to let go of. And they had come, respectfully, fearfully, in the way that poor men come to a great house when they have heard a rumor that will ruin them, to ask whether it was true, what was said in the market. That the Duke and Miss Sinclair had made their peace and would build the canal together after all, and whether, if they built it, the miller would be turned out and his wheel stopped and the valley's corn sent 12 miles to grind at Barrow's Edge prices, as the first draft of the scheme had threatened. The Duke received them standing, in the cold, formal way of his fathers, and heard them out, and was on the very edge of giving them the cold, formal answer his fathers would have given, that the improvement of the estate was the Duke's affair and the ordering of it his own, and that they might trust his justice or leave it, but they might not question it in his hall, when he heard, from the doorway, a voice he was coming to know. "I hope I am not intruding," said Arabella Sinclair, who had ridden over on a matter of her own and been shown in by the old manservant with more haste than ceremony, and who took in the whole scene, the frightened deputation, the miller's turning hat, the Duke drawn up cold in front of his own fire with one grey level sweep of her eye, and understood the whole of it, and did the most outrageous thing the Duke had yet seen her do, which was to cross his hall as though it were her own parlor and say, warmly to Tom Aldous, "Master Aldous, you have come about the mill. You are quite right to come. Sit down, all of you know, sit, the Duke will forgive it, there are chairs enough and this is not a matter to be settled with tired legs. Now, let us begin at the true beginning, which is not the canal at all but the water." And she sat down among them, in the Duke's own hall, uninvited, and took the frightened deputation of Thornaby into her confidence as though they were a board of directors and she the chairman, and within a quarter of an hour she had turned a scene of cold fear into a working conference, and the Duke of Thornaby stood by his own fire and watched her do it, and did not know whether to be furious at the liberty or lost in admiration at the skill, and was, in truth, a good deal of both. For she did not soothe them with promises. She did something the Duke would never have thought of, because it had never once in his life occurred to him that the people at the bottom of a scheme might be treated as parties to it. She told them the truth, the whole of it, the water and the levels and the 2 roads the canal might take, and she laid the miller's problem before the miller as a problem they must solve together and not a sentence to be passed upon him. The canal needed water above the ford. The miller had the right to that water. Very well. Then either the canal must give the miller back in some other form the power his wheel would lose, a new race, a better fall, a share in the tolls, a lease of the canal's own reserve in dry seasons, something, or there would be no canal because Miss Sinclair, who held Ashmead, would not sign her water into a scheme that ruined a 5-generation miller to fatten a duke, and she said so plainly, in the Duke's own hall in front of the Duke. "You see, Master Aldous," she said, "you are not a small obstacle. You are a party. A canal wants water and you own water, and a man who owns a thing another man needs is not an obstacle. He is a partner, whatever the great folk may call him. I know this, for I have lately been an obstacle myself and found it a very strong position." She said it without so much as a glance at the Duke, and the miller's chief tenant made a sound that was almost a laugh and turned it hastily into a cough, and the Duke of Thornaby felt the tips of his ears grow warm, which had not happened to him since he was a boy of 10. "The canal will not take your water for nothing," Arabella went on, "and it will not stop your wheel. I will not sign it if it does, and without my signature there is no canal at all, and his grace." Now she did look at him, one level gray look that was half a challenge and half, he thought, something almost like a plea, an invitation to be, in front of these frightened people, the man she was betting he could become. His Grace, I am very sure, would not wish to build his great work upon the ruin of the man who feeds the valley its bread. It would be poor arithmetic. It would cost him, in the goodwill of every soul in this country, a great deal more than it saved him in the price of a race and a fall of water. His Grace is a man who understands arithmetic. Are you not, your Grace? And there it was, the whole of it handed to him, the choice laid on the table in front of the deputation, the old cold answer of his father's on the one side, and on the other, the harder and better thing she was daring him to say. He could feel the two roads under him as plainly as he had felt the low ground under his boots on the flats. He could take back his hall and his dignity and dismiss the deputation with the justice of a duke, and be, that evening, exactly the man he had always been. Or he could do the thing that a year ago he would have thought beneath him and now, obscurely, painfully, wanted more than his dignity, which was to prove her right in front of the very people she had staked her water to protect. "Master Aldous," said the Duke of Thornaby, and heard his own voice come out of him in a shape it had not worn before, "you will not lose your mill, nor your bread, nor your water by my canal. You have my word on it, and Miss Sinclair, who trusts my word less than she should and watches it closer than any man, will hold me to it, and I give her leave to. Come to me on Friday, you and Ferrier my engineer, and we will draw you a new race and a new fall at my cost that will grind the valley's corn faster than the old, and we will write your ancient right into the deed of the canal so that no duke after me can touch it. That is not charity. Miss Sinclair is right, it is arithmetic. A great work built on a broken man is built on sand, and I did not spend 3 years and a fortune to build on sand. Go home, sleep. The mill stands." He had never in his life seen what he saw then, because he had never in his life given a poor man cause to look at him so. The great slow miller's face working, and his big hands going still on his hat at last, and the two tenants gripping each other's arms, and the parson bowing his head as though something had been answered that he had long prayed about. And the Duke of Thornaby discovered that this, and not the tolls, and not the greatness, and not the beating of neighbors, this was what land was for, and that he had held 10,000 acres for 11 years and never once until this afternoon understood the first thing about them, and that the person who had taught it to him in a single quarter of an hour was sitting in his own hall in a gray riding habit trying, and failing, to keep the triumph out of her level gray eyes. When the deputation had gone, with more bows and blessings than the Duke had received in the whole rest of his life together, he and Arabella were left alone in the hall with the fire, and there was a silence between them that was new, and warmer than any that had come before. "You had no right," said the Duke, "to walk into my hall and hold court in it." "None whatever," Arabella agreed. "I am very sorry. I saw the miller's face through the window as I rode up, and I have seen that face on my own tenants, and I could not ride past it. I will beg your pardon properly if you like, but you did the thing, your Grace. I only opened the door, you walked through it, and I did not push you, whatever it looked like. You could have thrown us all out. Half the men in the county would have. You did not." She rose and drew on her gloves, and at the door she paused and said, not lightly at all, "I came over to tell you I would walk the low ground Thursday and to bring you a level. But I find I have told you something else instead without meaning to, so I may as well say it plainly. I did not think a fortnight ago, when your Mr. Peck first came to buy my meadow, that there was very much in you but pride. I am glad to be wrong. I am not often glad to be wrong. It is a taste I am only beginning to acquire, but I find I like it in this case exceedingly. Thursday, then, bring stout boots. And do not," she added, with the ghost of the old challenge coming back into her face as she went out into the dusk, "let it go to your head, your Grace. You have mended one mill. There is a whole valley yet, and I mean to watch every root of it, and you have a great deal still to learn. and I have not the smallest intention of letting you off a single lesson." The Duke of Thornaby stood alone in his hall a long while after she had gone, in the firelight, among the portraits of his fathers who had never mended a mill in their lives, and he did not turn a single sentence of hers over in his mind, because he was doing a thing he had not done since boyhood, which was to feel, without shame and without calculation, purely and simply glad. And the gladness lasted him all the evening, and into the night, and was still there to his continuing astonishment, when Thursday came. Thursday came in bright and hard with a wind off the flats, and the Duke of Thornaby, who had not walked his own low ground on his own 2 feet in above a year, discovered that the country he had planned to conquer from a library table was a different thing entirely when it was under his boots and pulling at them. Arabella Sinclair met him at the ford with her level slung over her shoulder like a fowling piece, and an old man beside her, whom she named as Mr. Good, her steward, a spare, weathered, silent man of 70 who had served her father, and looked at the Duke with the frank, appraising eye of a person who has helped bury a good master, and will judge every man against him for the rest of his days. There was also, following at a little distance with a chain and a bundle of hazel pegs, a boy of perhaps 14, her under-steward in training, whom she treated with exactly the grave courtesy she gave the Duke, and this the Duke noticed and turned over, and could not decide whether it diminished him or raised the boy, and finally concluded with some discomfort that it did neither, that it was simply the way a just person behaved, and that he had not seen a great deal of it. They walked the low ground for 4 hours. Arabella showed him where the car took the water first and where it gave it up last, where the old flood mark stood on the trunk of a leaning alder, higher than his head, where the commons dipped, so that a canal cut on Ferrier's first line would have backed the winter water up across 60 acres of grazing, and drowned the beasts of families who had grazed there since before the house of Thornaby held a rood of it. She was right about all of it. Ferrier, tramping behind with his instruments, said little, but the little he said was the highest praise the Duke had ever heard him give a fellow creature, which was, "Aye, she's no wrong. And she was funny." This the Duke had not been prepared for, and had no defense against, because he had defenses against argument and defenses against flattery and defenses against tears, and none whatever against a woman who stood knee-deep in a cold dike reading a level and observed, without looking up, that his Grace's boots, which had cost more than Mr. Good earned in a quarter, were letting in water on the left, and that there was a cobbler in the village who would mend them for 9 pence, and never tell a soul that the Duke of Thornaby had wet feet like a Christian. "You take a great deal of pleasure, Miss Sinclair," he said, "in my discomfort." "I take a great deal of pleasure in most things, your Grace," she returned, sighting along the level. "It is cheaper than a carriage, and it keeps better. Hold the staff a hand higher, no, your hand, not the boy's. You will learn the ground faster if it is your own arm that aches. There. Now you know to a half-inch how much lower the common lies than the car, which is a thing you did not know a sennight ago and did not think worth knowing, and yet it is the whole of it. The whole of everything is generally the thing a proud man did not think worth knowing. Thank you. You may put the staff down. You have the makings of a chainman if the dukedom should fail." He laughed. He heard himself do it, out loud, alone on the flats with the wind and the water and this maddening, level, brown-eyed woman, and he could not remember with any certainty the last time he had laughed at his own expense and found the laughing pleasant. By the 4th week they had a line for the canal that would work, a line that neither of them could have drawn alone, that took the water at Ashmead under a sluice she would build, and he would pay for, and they would jointly command, that spared the commons, that fed Merefield's meadows in drought and drained them in flood, and that carried the Duke's coal to the river by a road cheaper than Ferrier's first by 9,000 pounds. Halloway drew the articles. They were to be partners in the water, though not in the canal itself, which remained the Duke's. She would hold the sluice and the meadow, he would hold the cut and the tolls, and each would be bound to the other by a web of covenants so ingenious that Halloway, presenting them, could not keep a note of professional wonder out of his voice. "I have never," he said, drawn a joint venture so tightly balanced that neither party can cheat the other without ruining himself. It is a thing of beauty, your grace. Miss Sinclair proposed the frame of it. I have only filled in the law. She would, said the Duke, and did not know that he had said it warmly until he saw Halloway's face. And Halloway, a discreet man, looked immediately back down at his papers, but not quite fast enough. There was a difficulty, and the difficulty was Sir Rowland Vane. Sir Rowland had leased Arabella the 2 fields of the northern loop gladly, when the loop was the Duke's dear folly, and the leasing of them a way to vex the Duke. But when it became known in the county, as such things always become known, that the Duke of Thornaby and Miss Sinclair of Marefield were no longer at war, but were building the canal together, and building it moreover along the cheap southern line that did not need his fields at all, Sir Rowland found that he had leased away 2 good fields for a long term at a fair rent, and got nothing by it but the pleasure of a spite that was now spent. And Sir Rowland Vane was not a man to enjoy a spent spite. He wanted back into the canal, and he saw, being grasping but not stupid, that the way back into the canal now ran not through the Duke, who despised him, but through Miss Sinclair, who held the water. And he saw further that Miss Sinclair was a young woman without father or brother or husband, and he began, that autumn, to pay calls at Marefield. The Duke heard of the calls from Peck, who heard of them from the village, where nothing was secret and everything was weighed. Sir Rowland has dined twice at Marefield this fortnight, said Peck, and sent a haunch of venison and been seen walking with Miss Sinclair by the mere. The talk is that he means to court her, your grace. And the talk is, Peck hesitated, being kind, the talk is that it would be a sensible match for a lady in her position. A woman alone, however clever, has need of a husband's name to stand between her and the world's roughness. Sir Rowland is a fool, but he is a landed fool, and he is willing, and there are those in the parish who think she would be wise to take him. The Duke of Thornaby was standing at the window of the estate room when Peck said this, and the grey country was going gold at the edges with the turn of the year, and he found that he had a most extraordinary and unwelcome feeling in his chest, a feeling he did not at first recognize because he had gone so many years without it, and when he did recognize it, he was so displeased with himself that he spoke more sharply than he meant. Miss Sinclair, he said, has more sense in her level than Sir Rowland Vane has in the whole of his fat person. She will not have him. I dare say, your grace, said Peck peaceably. Only sense is one thing and a woman's safety is another, and she has told her old governess, Mrs. Tarrant, that keeps house for her now, she has told Mrs. Tarrant that she is tired, your grace. That she is 24 and has run 600 acres alone for a year and been to law and to market and to the bank and fought a duke to a standstill, all alone, and that she is tired of doing it alone, and that a husband, even a foolish one, is a wall a woman may set her back against. Those were her words as they came to me. I only tell your grace because your grace asked me once what manner of woman she was, and I am not sure your grace has the whole of it yet. She is not made of levels and ledgers. She is made of the same stuff as the rest of us, and she is carrying a great weight, and she is tired, and Sir Rowland has arrived at exactly the moment a tired person is most easily persuaded that half a loaf is bread. The Duke said nothing for a long while. When he spoke, it was not to Peck. I had thought, he said, half to the window, that she wanted nothing. That was what disarmed me, a person who wanted nothing I could give. It did not occur to me that she might want the one thing I never thought to weigh because I had all of it and never spent a farthing on it. He turned. What is the thing, Peck, that a man in my position offers a woman? Not money, she is not poor. Not protection, she has defended herself better than I could defend her. What is left? Peck, who had been married 40 years to a woman he had wooed with nothing but constancy and a fondness for the same hymns, considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Company, your grace, he said. The thing you offer is that she should not have to carry it alone, not a wall to set her back against, a shoulder to stand beside. There's a difference, and a woman like that knows it, even when she's tired enough to forget it. Sir Rowland offers her a wall. Your grace might offer her the other thing, if your grace wanted to. I did not say I wanted to. No, your grace, said Peck, and had the wisdom to say no more. The Duke did not sleep well that night, which was itself a novelty, for he was a man who had always slept the deep, untroubled sleep of the perfectly self-satisfied. He lay awake in the great cold bed of his fathers and found his mind returning, with the persistence of water finding the low ground, to a low gate, and a woman in a man's hat with a lamb's blood on her arms pushing a strand of hair back with the inside of her wrist, and to the particular level warmth of her voice saying, "You are asking now," and to the wholly intolerable image of that voice, and that wit, and that gray competent gaze, given over across a dinner table, night after night, to the florid smiling emptiness of Sir Rowland Vane. He rose before the servants and rode out alone into the frost-drimed dawn, and he did not admit to himself where he was going, but the horse, who was wiser than his master in this as in several things, took him along the river and across the ford and up the rake drive of Marefield. And there, at the low gate in the cold gold light, was Arabella Sinclair, out before her household as he was out before his, standing quite alone with her arms folded on the top bar, looking at the mere where the heron was, and she did not seem, in that unguarded moment, before she knew she was watched, like a woman made of levels and ledgers at all. She seemed tired, exactly as Peck had said. She seemed like someone carrying water in her two hands over a very long way, careful not to spill, and alone. Then she heard the horse, and the tiredness folded itself away as neatly as a letter, and she turned, and the level warmth came back into her face, though something behind it stayed grave. "Your Grace," she said, "you are abroad early. Have you come to admire my heron? He is the only creature in this valley who has never once tried to buy anything from me, and I am grown very fond of him." "Miss Sinclair," said the Duke of Thornaby, and then found, dukes though he was and used to speech, that he did not in the least know how to say the thing he had ridden out through the frost to say, and so he said, instead, the true thing that was nearest to it. "They tell me Sir Rowland Vane means to marry you." Arabella's face did not change, but her hands on the top bar of the gate went still. "They tell a great deal in that village," she said. "It is the cheapest crop we grow and the surest. Sir Rowland has dined here, yes, and walked with me, and paid me the compliment of pretending to care about drainage for a whole afternoon, which for Sir Rowland is a courtship of some ardor. He has not asked me. He means to, and I have not yet decided what I shall say." She looked at him then, straight in the way she had, that let no man hide and did not trouble to hide herself. "Why do you ask me, your grace? It is not a duke's business whom his partner in a sluice gate marries, unless you are afraid Sir Rowland would meddle with the canal. Is that your fear? You may set it aside. I have tied the water up so tight in Halloway's covenants that no husband of mine could touch it. I saw to that before I ever let him through the gate. I always see to that first." And the Duke of Thornaby, who had come with no plan, and no advantage, and none of the levers he understood, and nothing at all in his two hands but the plain, unarmored truth, heard himself say the most reckless and least ducal thing he had said in the whole of his careful, armored life. "That is not my fear," he said. "My fear, Miss Sinclair, is that you would set your back against the wrong wall out of tiredness and be safe, and be diminished every day for the rest of your life by a man not fit to hold your level. That is my fear. And I find, to my very great inconvenience, that I have ridden out in the frost to tell you so, and that I have no better reason to give you than that I could not sleep for the thought of it, which is not a reason a sensible man would offer, and is the only true one I have." The heron rose off the mere. Neither of them watched it go. Arabella Sinclair was quiet for so long that the Duke had time to feel the full weight of what he had done, and to wish, with a violence that surprised him, that he had it back unsaid. He was a man who had spent his whole life keeping the advantage, and he had just given it away entire, laid it down on the top bar of a farm gate in the frost, and stood there with his hands open and empty for any use she cared to make of them. "Your Grace," she said at last, and her voice was gentler than he had ever heard it and more troubled, "you must not say such things to me." "Why must I not if they are true?" Because you are a duke, and I am a gentlewoman with 600 acres and a harem, and the distance between those two things is not a distance that closes. A month ago, you did not think women understood land. You thought better of it, and I am glad, and I have liked. I have liked our work together more than I have liked anything since my father died, and that is precisely why I must not let you say such things, because I have a great deal to lose and you have very little, and when a duke and a gentlewoman play that game the gentlewoman is the only one who is ruined by it. She unfolded her arms and stepped back from the gate and put the whole width of it between them on purpose, and he saw the cost of it in her face. You are lonely, your grace. I have seen it these 4 weeks. It is written as large as the rest of you. You have found, late and to your astonishment, a mind you may speak to plainly, and you have mistaken the relief of that for something warmer, because you have never had it before and do not know its name. It is not love. It is only that you were thirsty and did not know it, and I gave you water. Do not build a house on it. Go home. We have a canal to dig, and I should very much like to dig it with you, and I cannot do that if you court me at the gate at dawn like a man in a ballad. Go home, Julian. She had never used his name before. Neither had anyone, he thought, riding home. Not once in his adult life had a living soul called him simply by his name, without the grace or the duke or the my lord, as though he were a man and not an office. He held the sound of it the whole way home. She had said it, he was fairly sure, without meaning to. He was entirely sure that she had meant every calm, cruel, sensible word that came before it, and that she was right, and that he had no intention whatever of doing as she said. He did go home, and he did dig the canal, all that hard, bright autumn, and outwardly nothing changed between them. They walked the low ground and argued over sluices and drank the endless civilized tea, and if a stranger had watched them, he would have seen only 2 partners in a great work, courteous and sharp and companionable. But the Duke had learned something from a woman who read character larger than most men could read print, and he set himself, quietly, to a courtship she had forbidden, by the only means she had left him. He set himself to deserve her. He stopped waiting upon his tenants to break them and began, to Peck's open astonishment, to mend their roofs. He forgave Old Crow the rest of the debt aloud and in public. He sat, for the first time in 11 years, upon the parish bench and listened, and was surprised to find himself learning. He did none of it for show, or he told himself he did none of it for show, but he was aware, always in the corner of his mind where the truth was kept, that there was a gray-eyed woman across the river who would hear of each of these things and weigh them, and that he wanted, more than he had wanted the canal, more than he had wanted anything, to be found when she weighed him, not wanting. The Michaelmas fair at Thornaby was the great event of the country year, when every farmer and dealer and gentleman for 20 miles came to the town to buy and sell beasts, and to settle debts, and to be seen, and it was at the fair that 2 things happened which shaped the whole of the winter to come. The first was the Dowager Duchess. Julian's mother had lived these 5 years in the dower house at Thornaby, and in the town in the season, a tall, handsome, formidable old woman who had ruled her son's father, and had never entirely forgiven the world for the fact that she could not rule her son. She came to the fair, as she came to everything, to inspect, and she had heard for the county's cheapest crop grew as thickly in her drawing-room as in the alehouse. A great deal about Miss Sinclair of Marefield, and she did not like the sound of her, because a woman who could beat her son was a woman who required watching, and a woman her son had stopped abusing and started admiring was a woman who required destroying. She found Arabella at the fair at the sheep pens, doing business in a good plain gown, with Mr. Good at her elbow and a dealer before her whom she was declining, with great courtesy, to allow to cheat her. The dowager watched this for a while, unobserved, and then came up in her rustling black, and was introduced by a nervous acquaintance, and looked Arabella Sinclair over from her sensible boots to her escaping strand of hair with the slow insolence of 40 generations. "So you are the young person," said the Dowager Duchess, "who bought my son's field." "I am the young person," Arabella agreed pleasantly, "who bought a field your son wanted. I did not know it was his until after. It was Mr. Crow's, and he was glad to sell it, and I paid him honestly, which I understand was not the family's original plan for Mr. Crow. There was a small dangerous silence. The nervous acquaintance looked as though she might faint. The Dowager Duchess, who had not been answered so in a very long time, felt the unfamiliar sensation of a foothold giving way beneath her, and did what such people always do, which was to reach at once for the bluntest weapon in the case. "You are clever," she said. "I will allow you clever, but you are nobody, Miss Sinclair, and you would do well to remember it. My son may find you a diverting partner in his ditch-digging. He will not find you anything more. There have been Duchesses of Thornaby for 300 years, and every one of them brought blood, or a great fortune, or an alliance the family needed. You bring a wet field and away with a dealer. I say this to you kindly and once so that you are not hurt worse later by hoping. You are not a possible thing. Enjoy your canal. Do not mistake it for a courtship." The Duke, coming through the press of the fair to find them, arrived in time to hear the last of it, and he stopped dead, with a cold fury rising in him that he had never felt on his own behalf in his life. But he did not need to speak, and this he would remember always, because Arabella Sinclair did not need defending, and would not have thanked him for it, and answered the Dowager Duchess of Thornaby herself in the middle of the sheep pens, in a voice pitched exactly loud enough and not 1 degree louder. "Your Grace," she said, "you are quite right that I am nobody, and quite right that I bring no blood and no fortune and no alliance, and I thank you for your kindness in telling me so plainly, for plainness is the only courtesy I value. But you are wrong about one thing, and as we are being kind to one another I will be kind enough to correct it. You say I am not a possible thing. Madam, everything I have is a thing that was not possible. It was not possible for a woman to keep her father's estate out of debt in these years, and I have done it. It was not possible for a woman to buy the one field a duke needed out from under him, and I did it. It was not possible for a woman to understand land. Your son said so to his steward, and half the county heard him. And yet here I stand at the neck of his valley with my hand on his water. I have made a short career, madam, out of doing the thing that was not possible, and I have found it no harder than the possible things, and a great deal more interesting. Whether I shall ever be Duchess of Thornaby I neither know nor, at this moment, greatly care. But if I ever decide that I wish to be, I would not, were I you, wager the dower house against it. Good day. Your dealer, Mr. Bellman, is watering your milk. I would change him. Good day." And she curtsied, correctly, no more, and turned back to her sheep, and left the Dowager Duchess of Thornaby standing in the mud of the fair with her mouth very slightly open, and the Duke of Thornaby, a little way off, unseen by either of them, discovered that he was not angry any longer at all, but was instead so filled with a fierce and helpless admiration that he had to turn away and look hard at a pen of bullocks until he had command of his face. The second thing that happened at the fair was that Sir Rowland Vane, made bold by wine and by the general license of the day, and having heard that the Duke's mother had come to warn the little Sinclair woman off, calculated that the field was now clear and his hour had come, and proposed to Arabella Sinclair publicly, in the yard of the George, before a crowd of dealers and farmers and gentlemen, on one florid knee, in a manner he plainly believed to be gallant and irresistible. It was a cruel thing to do, though Sir Rowland was too vain to know it was cruel, to ask a woman before 100 witnesses, so that a refusal would be a public humiliation of her rather than of him, and to leave her the choice between wounding him in front of the county or being carried by the crowd's expectation into a yes she had not decided to give. The Duke, at the edge of the crowd, took one step forward with murder in his heart, and then made himself stop, because he had learned at the sheep pens not an hour before that Arabella Sinclair fought her own battles and won them, and that the truest thing he could do for her was to trust her too. She let Sir Rowland finish. She let him get all the way to the end of his flowery speech, and the crowd hushed, and the moment hung. And then Arabella Sinclair, standing very straight in the inn yard with the low gold sun of the fair's end behind her, said, in a voice warm enough that Sir Rowland himself could not afterward claim she had been unkind, "Sir Rowland, you do me great honor, and you do it very publicly, and I will answer you as publicly so that there can be no mistake made of it in the telling, for the telling in this country is swift. You are a landed gentleman of good estate, and I am sensible of the compliment. But I will not marry you. I will not marry any man to have a wall to set my back against, which is the only thing you are offering me, and we both know it, and the good people here know it too. I have carried my acres alone for a year and more, and I have found that I would rather carry them alone all my life than carry them beside a man I do not love. And Sir Rowland, forgive me, for you have made me say it in the open. I do not love you, and I never shall, and you knew that when you knelt, or you would not have knelt in a crowd. Get up. Have some wine. There is no shame in it that a little wine will not mend by morning. But do not ask me again, for the answer is fixed, and I would not have you spend hope on it, for hope is dear, and you have wasted enough of it on my 2 fields already. She gave him her hand to help him rise, so that the thing ended in courtesy and not in a fall, and the crowd, which had come to see a woman cornered, went away instead, having seen a woman decline a knight without wounding him, which was a rarer and finer show, and half of them a little in love with her, and the other half only afraid. And the Duke of Thornaby, at the edge of the yard, watched Arabella Sinclair refuse the safe wall in front of the whole county, and understood, with a certainty that went through him like cold water and then like warmth, 2 things at once: that she was, beyond any question, the only woman he would ever want to stand beside for the rest of his life, and that she had told him plainly at a farm gate in the frost exactly why she could not let him say so, because the distance between them did not close, and because she had a great deal to lose and he very little, and she would not be ruined for his loneliness. He went home from the fair, and he did not ride to Marefield at dawn, and he did not say a single reckless thing. He sat down instead that night at the great library table where the whole quarrel had begun, and he began, slowly, deliberately in his own hand, to draw up a different sort of covenant, one that Halloway would never see, and that had nothing in it about sluices or tolls or water. And he understood that if he was to have Arabella Sinclair at all, it would not be by any lever or advantage or ducal word, but only by finding a way to close from his side with his own hands. The distance, she had said, would not close, and that this was the one negotiation of his life in which all the strength was hers, and he had nothing to bring to the table but himself, made worthy, if he could manage it, of the standing beside. A canal, the Duke of Thornaby had learned, is not finished when the last spadeful of earth is thrown. It is only finished when the barges run upon it, and barges do not run of themselves. They run because there is something to carry and someone paying to carry it, and the whole of the canal's worth, the tolls, the greatness, the 3 years and the fortune hung, that autumn, upon the coal masters of Barrow's Edge agreeing to send their coal down the new water instead of over the old ruined roads, and the coal masters of Barrow's Edge had not yet agreed to anything. They were a hard, close, moneyed set of men, the proprietors of the coal field, risen mostly from nothing and proud of it in the sharp way of men who have made their own fortunes and mean you to know it, and they had no reverence for a duke, which the duke found refreshing until he discovered what it cost him. For there was a rival. Over the ridge in the next valley, a company of Leeds men had got up a scheme of their own, a tramway of iron rails to carry the coal the other way, to a different river and a different market, and the tramway men had been courting the coal masters for a year with dinners and promises and shares in their company, and the coal masters, being canny, had let themselves be courted by both sides at once and committed to neither, waiting, as such men wait, to see which suitor would offer most. The great meeting was called for a market day at Barrow's Edge, in the long room of the principal inn, and all the interests came to it. The coal masters at the head of the table, close and watchful, the Leeds men with their maps of iron, the Barrow's Edge Bank in the person of its manager, a dry, precise man named Prentice who held the paper of half the county and lent to both schemes and cared only which would pay him surest, the Duke of Thornaby, come to secure his tolls, and Miss Sinclair of Marefield, invited by the coal masters themselves, to the Duke's private surprise, because they had heard she held the water and they were men who liked to know exactly who held what before they signed. It began badly, and it began badly through the Duke. He had prepared, of course. He had figures and farrier's estimates and every advantage of cost and grade and distance, and the plain truth was that his canal was the better road for the coal by a wide margin, cheaper and gentler than the Leeds men's iron by any honest reckoning. He had only to lay it out and let the arithmetic speak. But the coal masters were not deferential, and one of them, a blunt, thick-necked man named Hartrop, the chief among them, put a question to the Duke early and put it rudely, asked him, before the whole table, what surety the coal masters had that the noble proprietor of this canal, having got their trade, would not raise his tolls upon them at his pleasure once the tramway was beaten and gone and they had no other road, and squeeze them as, said Hartrop bluntly. The great folk had squeezed the small in this county time out of mind. It was a fair question, and it was rudely put, and the Duke of Thornaby, who had spent one hard-learned year humbling his pride in his own valley, found that in this strange room, among these hard, strange men who did not defer to him, the old pride rose up whole as though the year had never been, and answered before his better judgment could catch it. "You have the word of the Duke of Thornaby," he said, cold and high. "That has been surety enough in this county for 400 years. If it is not surety enough for a coal master, sir, then perhaps the coal master had best take his trade to the gentlemen of Leeds and see whether their iron is warmer than my word." There was a silence, and it was the wrong kind, and the Duke knew it was the wrong kind the instant the words were out, but a Duke cannot unsay a thing before a table full of men, or believes he cannot, which comes to the same. Hartrop sat back. The Leeds men, delighted, exchanged the smallest of glances. Prentice the banker looked down at his figures with the carefully blank face of a man watching a good loan turn bad. For the Duke had, in one sentence of pride, handed the coal masters exactly the proof they feared, that his canal, once they were committed to it, would be governed not by contract but by his lordly pleasure, and that his pleasure when crossed was cold. And he had done it in front of the rival, and the rival had only to smile and offer, as the Leeds men now did, a written guarantee of fixed rates for 21 years, iron-bound, notarized, the very surety the Duke had just refused to give. The meeting, which the Duke had come to win, tilted from him in the space of 5 minutes, and he felt it tilt, and could not right it, because the only thing that would right it was the one thing his pride had just forbidden, and a proud man cannot climb down in the same quarter-hour he has climbed up, or thinks he cannot. He saw the whole 3 years going over the edge, the tolls, the greatness, the coal going the other way over the ridge on Leeds iron, the canal a ditch of standing water and his fortune drowned in it. And he sat at the head of that hostile table with his front up and his cause bleeding to death behind it, and did not know how to stop the wound without opening his own throat. And Arabella Sinclair, 3 places down the table, cleared her throat and asked in her mild level voice whether she might say a word, being a party to the water if not to the coal. The coal masters, curious, let her speak, and she did not rescue the Duke. This the Duke understood, watching her, with a hot flush of shame and gratitude tangled so close together he could not tell them apart. She did not smooth his pride or gloss his blunder or beg the table's indulgence for a great man's temper. She simply, quietly, built a better bridge and invited everyone to walk across it and leave the wreck of his sentence behind, unmentioned, on the near bank. "Master Hartrop is right to want surety," she said, "and his grace is right that a man's bare word is a poor beam to build a bridge on, though I do not think his grace meant it quite as it fell out. A long day in a hot room will roughen any man's phrasing, and there is no coal master here, I think, who has not said a blunter thing to a debtor before breakfast." A low rumble went round the table that was almost a laugh, and the Duke saw Hartrop's thick neck ease by a degree, and understood that she had, in one soft sentence, given him back a door to walk out of without begging. "So let us not build on words at all," Arabella went on. "Let us build on interest, which holds when words fail. Master Hartrop fears his grace will raise the tolls once the tramway is gone. Very well. Then let the tolls not be his grace's to raise. I hold the water. Without my water there is no canal, his grace will confirm it, for we have quarreled about it at some length." Now the laugh came properly, and the Duke found himself, absurdly, near to laughing with them, the shame draining out of him and something like wonder rising in its place. Let the schedule of tolls be fixed in the deed of the canal for 21 years, as the Leeds gentlemen offer, but let it be fixed by a covenant between his grace and myself, so that neither of us may alter it without the other, and let a copy be lodged with Mr. Prentice at the bank, who lends to all of us and cheats none of us and will hold both our feet to the fire, for it is his trade. Then the coal masters have their surety, not from a duke's word, nor from a Leeds company that may fail in 10 years and leave its guarantee so much waste paper, but from two neighbors who cannot rob you without robbing each other, and from a banker who will not let either of us try. That is a stronger beam than any word. Will it serve, Master Hartrop? It served. Of course it served. It was better than anything the Leeds men had brought, and the coal masters knew a strong thing when it was laid before them. And by the end of the long afternoon the coal of Barrow's Edge was pledged to the canal, on fixed tolls, under a covenant lodged with Prentice, and the Leeds men rolled up their maps of iron and went back over the ridge, and the Duke of Thornaby had won the thing he had come to win and very nearly thrown away, and had won it, entirely and only because a woman he was forbidden to court had built him a bridge out of his own disaster and let him walk across it with his head up, and never once, then or after in public or in private, reproached him for the fall. He caught her at the inn door in the blue autumn dusk, as she was drawing on her gloves to go, and the coal masters and the banker were still within, warm with agreement, and for a moment the two of them stood alone in the passage with the cold coming in from the yard. "You saved it," said the Duke low. "I lost it in 5 minutes out of pride I thought I had buried, and you saved it, and you let me keep my face while you did it. Why, you owed me nothing. You might have let me drown in there and taken the water and the coal and the whole scheme for yourself. Hartrop would have signed with you gladly. You could have had all of it. Why did you throw me the rope?" Arabella Sinclair paused with one glove half on and looked at him in the failing light, and the level gray guardedness was there. But behind it, for just a moment, before she smoothed it down, he saw the other thing, the thing she was fighting, the thing she had told him at the Frost-Dawn gate not to build a house on. "Because I did not want the whole scheme for myself," she said. "I have found these last weeks, rather to my alarm, that I do not want it without you in it. There. That is more than I meant to say, and a great deal more than is wise, and you will oblige me by forgetting it, or at least by not mentioning it, which is the most a person can honestly promise about a thing once said." She got the glove on. "And because, your Grace Julian, a person's worst 5 minutes are not the truth of them. I have watched you a whole autumn now. I have seen you mend the miller's wheel and sit the parish bench and forgive old Crow his debt in the open street. I know what you are, under the 5 bad minutes, better than you know it yourself, because you keep forgetting and I never do. So when the pride rose up in there and made a fool of the man I know you to be, I did not think, that is the truth of him. I thought that is the old skin he has not quite shed, and I will not let it strangle the new one in front of a room of coal masters. That is all. Do not make more of it. It is only that I have decided against my judgment, against my interest, against every sensible thing I have ever believed about dukes, that you are worth the rope. Now let me go home before I say a third unwise thing, for they come in threes, and the third is always the one a woman cannot take back." She did not let him answer. She went out into the yard and mounted and rode into the dusk toward Marefield, and the Duke of Thornaby stood in the inn passage at Barrow's Edge with the cold coming in, and the coal masters laughing behind him and his whole scheme saved. And he understood that something had shifted between them that afternoon that would not shift back, that she had said, in a passage in the failing light, more than she had meant to, and that the wall she had set between them at the Frost-Dawn gate had, without either of them quite deciding it, a door in it now, and the door was ajar. He rode home the long way, through the dark, past the black shape of Marefield across the river with its one lit window, and he did not go to the window, because he had learned patience and meant to keep it. But he sat his horse a while in the road and looked at the light, and made himself 2 promises that he meant to keep whatever it cost him. The first was that he would never again, in any room, Let the old pride rise up and shame the man she had decided he was worth being. That he would carry her good opinion before him like a lamp and steer by it, in company and alone, until the man she believed in and the man he was were the same man at last. The second promise he made was smaller and harder, and he did not entirely keep it, and the not keeping of it would cost them both dear before the winter was out. He promised himself that whatever he did for her from this night on, he would do it in the open with her knowledge as a partner and never as a protector. That he would never again step in front of her to fight a battle in the dark, however much he wished to spare her. That he would honor, above his own longing to shield her, the one fierce thing she had told him at the gate and shown him at the fair and proved to him again this very afternoon, that Arabella Sinclair did not want to be saved. She wanted to be joined. And a man who could not tell the difference between the two did not deserve the door that stood tonight at last, a little way ajar. He rode home under the cold stars with the two promises in him, and the first he would keep to the end of his life, and the second he would break within the month. And the breaking of it, and the mending of it, and what the flood would teach him in the mending, were still before him in the dark, unguessed, as the year turned toward its hardest weather and the happiest, most perilous winter of his life came on. The winter that followed was, though the Duke of Thornaby did not know it yet, the happiest season of his life, and it did not look like happiness at all, for it was made entirely of work. The canal went forward. All through the short cold days, the navvies dug the great cut across the flats, and the sluice rose at Ashmead stone by stone, and the Duke and Miss Sinclair were upon the ground together 3 and 4 days in the week, in the frost and the fog, and once memorably, in a driving sleet that sent even the navvies to shelter and left the two of them alone under the lee of the half-built sluice sharing the contents of her flask, which proved to be not tea at all but a very good brandy, and laughing about it. And not speaking of the gate, or the fair, or the frost dawn, or any of the things that stood unspoken and enormous between them like the sluice itself, half-built and rising. He learned her, that winter, as he had learned the low ground, by walking it under his own boots until he knew it to the half-inch. He learned that her lightness was real but was laid, like her hedges, over years of hard labor and quiet grief, that she had nursed her father through a long dying and taken up the estate the same week she buried him, with no one to help her but old Good and old Mrs. Tarrant and her own refusal to be beaten. That she loved the valley, the actual mud and water and beasts and people of it, with a fierce protective love that was the true root of the whole quarrel, for she had bought Ashmead not to spite a duke, but to shield 60 families of the poor, and would have done it against any man on earth. He learned that she was, under the wit and the level and the ledgers, lonely as he was lonely and braver about it, and that the two lonelinesses, set side by side over a shared flask in the sleet, seemed to him to fit together the way two halves of a broken thing fit, so exactly that a man might run his thumb along the join and scarcely feel it. And she was changing toward him. He was too honest now to pretend he did not see it. The old level guardedness came down by degrees over the winter weeks. She teased him more gently and argued with him more fiercely, which he understood, being no longer a fool about her, to be the same thing. She began to send him small dry notes across the river about matters that had nothing to do with the canal, a good book she had finished, a foolish thing the parson had said, a heron sighted on his side of the water that she claimed as her property and demanded returned. He kept every one of them, he answered every one. And once in February, when a sudden thaw sent the beck over its banks in the night and threatened the new stonework of the sluice, they worked side by side in the dark and the cold water for 6 hours with the navvies and the tenants to save it, and at the gray dawn, soaked and filthy and shaking with cold and the wild exhilaration of a thing saved, Arabella Sinclair had turned to him with her whole tired face alight and laughed, and taken his 2 frozen hands in her 2 frozen hands, without thinking. The way she would have taken Goods and said, "We held it, Julian, we held it," and then gone still with his hands in hers in the gray light, the water running off both of them, and neither of them had let go for a long moment, and it had been, though not one word of courtship was spoken, the nearest thing to a betrothal the Duke of Thornaby had ever known. She let go first. She always let go first. But she was slower about it every time, and he was patient, patient as he had never been about anything, because he had understood at last that patience was the only currency she would take, and that he was, for the first time in his life, rich in the only thing that could buy the only thing he wanted. If he had left it there, if the proud man, so lately humbled, had only trusted the humbling to finish its work, all might have been well, and the spring might have brought the thing to its own slow ripening. But there was a fault in him still, deep and old, that the winter had covered over but not mended, and it was this, that at the bottom of the Duke of Thornaby, under the new-learned patience, there lived an old certainty that it was his part to manage the world, to arrange it, to move the pieces for the good of the people too weak or too poor or too female to move them for themselves, and that this certainty, which he mistook for care, was only the old condescension wearing a kinder coat. It undid him in March, and it undid him bitterly through his very love. Halloway learned it and told him, thinking it good news that Sir Rowland Vane, refused and sulking and short of money as grasping men so often are, had quietly bought up the small mortgage that lay upon Marefield. There was such a mortgage. The Duke had not known it. It was old and modest, raised by Arabella's father years before against a bad harvest and never quite paid off, a few £100 only, a trifle to a great estate and a lever to a small one. Sir Rowland had bought it from the Barrow's Edge Bank, and Sir Rowland, Halloway believed, meant to use it to press for payment at an awkward season, or to make himself a nuisance, or simply to have a hold over the woman who had refused him in the yard of the George before the whole county. It was a spiteful, ungentlemanly, small-minded stroke, and it was, Halloway pointed out, entirely legal. The Duke of Thornaby heard this, and his first feeling was a clean, bright anger, and his second, hard on its heels, was the old certainty rising up in him whole and unexamined and disguised, as it always was, as love. He would fix it. He would protect her. He would buy the mortgage back from Sir Rowland at whatever it cost, and hold it himself, or better, tear it up, and she would be free of the man forever and safe, and she need never even know the danger she had been in, for that was the finest part of it, the part that pleased the old proud thing in him most of all. She need never know. He would set it right in the dark, and she would go on with her heron and her ledgers, shielded unaware by a duke who loved her too well to trouble her with her own affairs. He did it within the week. He sent Halloway to Sir Rowland with a great deal of money, and Sir Rowland, who wanted money far more than he wanted spite, sold the mortgage gladly, and the Duke of Thornaby held, by the end of March, the whole small debt of Marefield in his own strong-box, and he was, walking home that evening through the first soft dusk of the coming spring, as pleased with himself as he had been in the old days, and he did not once hear in the whole of his pleasure the small cold voice at the very bottom of him that was trying and failing to make him remember a woman saying, "I find it very useful to be underestimated," and a woman saying, "You would have me safe and diminished every day," and a woman saying plainly at a gate, "Do not build a house on it." He meant to tell her. He did mean to, eventually, to let it come out gently, some quiet evening, that the danger had passed and been dealt with, and to be thanked, and to wave the thanks away. But the county's cheapest crop grew faster than his good intentions. Sir Rowland, smarting under the sale and wishing to injure where he could no longer profit, made sure the story traveled, and made sure it traveled in the shape most wounding to her. Not the Duke saved you, but the Duke owns you now, the little Sinclair woman that thought herself so grand, so independent, so above a good honest offer of marriage. Why, she is mortgaged to Thornaby like any tenant, her acres are his in all but name. He holds her paper in his box, and she does not even know it. Managed like a child, the clever creature, managed like a child. Arabella heard it from Mrs. Tarrant, who had heard it in the village and who came to her white-faced, and Arabella heard it out to the end, standing very still by the window that looked toward the mere, and then she sent old Good across the river the same hour with a note. And the note, which the Duke opened at his own great library table where the whole matter had begun, said only, in her plain, clear, upright hand, with no salutation and no ending, You will bring me my father's mortgage at Marefield tomorrow at noon, and you will bring the assignment that shows you bought it, and you will explain to me to my face why the Duke of Thornaby thought it his to buy. Do not send Mr. Halloway. Come yourself. A.S. He read it 3 times, and the pleasure of the past week went out of him like heat from a stone, and in its place came a dread he had no name for, because he had never before in his life done a thing he was afraid to answer for, and he understood, sitting alone in the cooling room with her cold note in his hand, that he had done the one unforgivable thing, that he, who had learned all winter to stand beside her, had in a single week of old habit stepped in front of her, and taken her battle out of her hands to fight it for her in the dark, exactly as though she were a woman who did not understand land, that he had, at the very last and by the very hand of his love, called her nobody as surely as his mother had called her nobody in the mud of the fair, and that there was no lever in the world and no advantage and no ducal word and no quantity of money that could buy back what he had spent. He did not sleep. Toward morning it began to rain, a hard, steady march rain out of the west that did not slacken, and the Duke of Thornaby stood at his black window and watched it come down on the low ground he had learned to love, on the mere and the car and the alder and the half-built sluice. And he did not yet know, though the water knew and old Good knew, and Arabella at her own black window across the river knew, that the rain that was falling was not an ordinary rain, and that the beck was already rising in the dark, and that before he ever kept his noon appointment to answer for the small old sin of his pride, the valley itself was going to call in a far larger debt from them both. By first light the rain had not stopped and the beck was over its banks, and by mid-morning the man the Duke had sent to look at the sluice came back at a gallop with his horse blown and his face gray, and what he had to say the Duke understood before he had finished saying it, because he had spent a winter learning the ground, and the ground was speaking to him now in the only language that admits of no argument. The flood was the great one. The old men had a name for it, the sort of flood that comes once in a generation and is remembered by the height of a mark cut on the church wall, and the last mark on the church wall was 40 years old, and this water, the gray-faced man said, was going to pass it. The beck and the river were both coming down full off the high ground with a week of snow-thaw behind a night of rain, and all that water was funneling down toward the neck of the valley, toward Ashmead, toward the half-built sluice and the low commons below it, where the Duke's mind, trained now, ran ahead of the man's words to the thing that mattered, where 60 families grazed their beasts, and where, this being the lambing and the poorest season, a good part of the valley's whole small wealth stood on 4 legs in the wet, with the water rising round it. And the sluice was the key to all of it. This the Duke also understood now, as he could not have understood it a year before. The great new sluice at Ashmead, their sluice, hers and his, half-built and untested, was the one work in the whole valley that could take this water and rule it, could hold the flood back off the commons long enough for the beasts to be driven up, and then be opened in the right order and at the right hour, to let the water down the new deep cut of the canal and away to the river below the town, harmlessly, instead of letting it spread and stand and drown the low ground for a fortnight as every such flood had always done. Built and manned and worked right, the sluice could save the valley. Worked wrong, opened too soon, or too late, or in the wrong order, by a man who did not know to the half-inch how the ground lay, it would drown the commons faster than the flood itself, for it would loose the whole weight of the held water in a wall down onto the very families it was meant to spare. There was one person in the valley who knew the levels of that ground to the half-inch, and it was not the Duke of Thornaby. He did not hesitate. Whatever else was in him, the winter had put this much in him true. He sent no messenger, made no calculation of pride, wasted not 1 minute upon the ruin that stood between them. He was in the saddle and across the swollen ford, which his horse took shoulder-deep and trembling, and which an hour later no horse would take at all, and up the raked drive of Marefield before the church clock had struck 11, and he came into her yard soaked to the skin and bareheaded with the rain running off him. And Arabella Sinclair was already in the yard, in her old brown habit and her man's hat, with Good beside her and a cart being loaded, and the orders coming off her fast and clear. for she had known before he had. She had known at first light. She was already at war with the water. She looked at him across the streaming yard. Between them, unspoken, hung the note and the mortgage and the whole raw wound of the day before, and the noon appointment neither of them would keep. "The sluice," said the Duke. "The sluice," she agreed. There was no time and they both knew it, and everything that was not the water fell away between them like a thing dropped in deep flood and gone. If we hold the water at Ashmead till the commons are clear, and then let it down the cut in the right order, we save the valley. If we get it wrong, we drown it. I know the levels. You have the men and the money and the horses and the weight to make 100 frightened people do a hard thing quickly. Neither of us can do it alone. Can you set aside what stands between us for one day, Julian, and put yourself under my orders on that ground, and do exactly as I say the moment I say it, though every proud bone in you cry out against taking a woman's word? Can you do that today, for the valley? Because I cannot save it without you, and I will not save it beside a man who will argue with me at the sluice gate while the water comes." "I can do that," said the Duke of Thornaby, "and I can do it gladly, and there is no proud bone left in me that you have not already broken, and I will answer to you for all of it tomorrow if there is a tomorrow. Give me my orders." She gave them. And the long, terrible day that followed was, the Duke would think ever after, the truest thing he had ever been part of, the one day of his life in which the whole of him, his strength, his rank, his money, his hard-driving will, and the new patience too, was bent to a single end that was not his own advantage but the plain saving of the helpless, under the command of a mind better than his own, and it was the happiest hard day he had ever known, though it was made of terror from the first hour to the last. He carried her orders across the valley on the best horse in his stable while it could still be ridden, and on his own 2 feet when it could not. By her word, he threw open his own barns and his own dry high ground to the tenants' beasts, Thornaby's and Merefield's and Vane's alike, without a thought for whose they were. By her word he set 40 of his navvies, big men and unafraid of water, in a chain along the failing bank of the commons to drive the flood-dazed sheep, and cattle up the one lane that was still open, while the water rose at their backs a hand's breadth in the hour. By her word he stood himself, all the grey afternoon, at the half-built sluice with Ferrier the engineer and a gang of men, and the great bulks of timber, holding the water, holding it, the whole weight of the flooded valley pressing on green unfinished stone that groaned and shifted under it, packing the gaps with clay and hurdles and their own bodies, buying with every minute they held it another minute for the beasts and the families to come clear of the low ground below. And Arabella Sinclair was everywhere, and nowhere long in the rain, on foot and on horseback, reading the water the way she read a ledger, sending word by boys and dripping men, "Hold it yet, hold it. They are not clear of Long Ing, hold it, now goods people are up, but the marsh end cottages are still in it. Hold it another quarter hour if the stone will bear," and the stone bore it barely. And the Duke of Thornaby stood in the breach with his shoulder against a balk of oak, and the flood of a generation on the far side of it, and understood that he was, at last, exactly where a man should be, which was in the low place in the cold water, holding back the ruin with his own body from people who would never know his name, at the word of a woman he had wronged and loved and would spend the rest of his life, if she would let him, learning to deserve. The worst came at dusk. Word ran up the failing lane, past man to man through the rain, that the marsh end was not clear after all, that old widow Pashley, who was deaf and stubborn and lived lowest of all, had not come out, had not heard the drum, was in her cottage with the water at the sill and rising and no soul left near her, for the last of the drovers were up the lane and the water had closed the road behind them. And the choice came to the Duke at the sluice in the grey wet dark, and it came in Arabella's voice, riding up out of the murk on a spent horse with her hat gone and her hair down and her face white as the water. The sluice could not be held much longer. The stone was going. In half an hour it must be opened, and the flood let down the cut or it would burst and take everything, and old Pashley was below, in the path of both, the standing flood on the one side and the loosed water on the other, and there was no time to reach her and be back before the sluice must go. "How long to the cottage and back?" said the Duke. "Julian." "How long?" "3/4 of an hour, and you have not got it. If you go, either you drown when the sluice bursts of itself, or Farrier opens it to save the valley and drowns you with the old woman, or he does not open it to spare you and the valley drowns instead. I cannot make that choice. I will not. Do you hear me? I have made hard choices all my life, and I will not make that one. Do not put it on me." "You are not making it," said the Duke of Thornaby, and for the first and only time that day he took a decision from her, and he did it gently, and he did it cert, because there are things a man may not delegate even to a mind better than his own, and this was one. "I am. Open the sluice when the stone tells you to open it, Arabella, and not 1 minute later, and do not wait for me. Save the valley. That is your work, and no one alive can do it but you. Widow Pashley is mine. Farrier, the small boat and the long rope, and 2 men who can swim. Now." He was already moving, and Arabella Sinclair, who had not wept once in the whole terrible day, stood in the rain on her spent horse and called after him the only thing that could have reached him and the truest thing she had ever said, and it stopped him for a half a heartbeat in the dark, though it did not turn him back. "If you drown, Julian, I will never forgive you, for I find I have been trying since the frost not to love you, and I have wholly failed. And I will not be a woman who loved a man for 1 winter and buried him in a flood. Do you hear me? Come back. You insufferable, high-handed, beloved man. Come back, or I shall have no one left in this valley worth quarreling with." The Duke of Thornaby went down into the dark, and the killing water with a rope round his chest, and a borrowed boat and 2 brave men, and the sound of her voice in him warmer than any fire. And behind him, at the failing sluice, alone with the whole ruin of the valley pressing on the green stone, and the choice she had refused and been given anyway, Arabella Sinclair set her jaw, and wiped the rain from her eyes, and turned to read the water, and to do her own hard part, and to wait in the closing dark to learn whether the man she had just told she loved would come back up the drowned lane alive, or whether she had opened the sluice that saved the valley and lost him in the same black hour. Afterward, no one could say to the exact minute how long it was between the boat going down the drowned lane and the sluice being opened, for time in a great flood keeps its own accounts and settles them privately. But Arabella Sinclair, standing at the sluice in the last of the light with her hand on the release and her whole soul out in the dark upon the water, held it longer than she should have. She held it past the point where the green stone groaned and a seam of it cracked, and Farrier at her elbow said, "Lo, miss, she's going. We cannot hold her. We must let it down now or she'll burst and take the town." And still she held it, one breath and another, listening not to the stone but to the dark below where a man had gone, and she was, she knew, wagering the valley she had given a year of her life to defend against the life of a man she had known 1 winter. And she was doing the very thing she had sworn she would not do, and she could not make her hand move. And then up out of the murk and the roar, small and far and then nearer, a shout, Farrier's own man on the bank, hoarse with it, "They're up. The boat's up there at the rise, they're clear of the water, pull, lads, pull them in, they've got the old woman, she's living, they're clear." And Arabella Sinclair let out one sound that was not quite a word, and did not wait to see the boat, and did not let herself, for there was no time. She turned back to the stone and the water and did her work, and opened the great sluice of Ashmead in the right order and at the right minute, and the held flood of a generation went down the new deep cut of the canal with a sound like the end of the world and away to the river below the town, harmlessly off the commons, off the low ground, off the 60 families and their beasts, and the valley was saved by the very work the Duke had begun in pride and finished, at the last, in something better. She found him a quarter of an hour later on the rise above Marsh End, where they had carried old Widow Pashley into a dry barn and wrapped her in the coats off their own backs, and the old woman was alive and furious, and demanding to know who had broken down her door, which everyone agreed was the surest sign she would do. The Duke of Thornaby was sitting on the wet ground with his back against the barn wall, soaked past soaking, blue about the lips, his fine coat gone and one arm hanging where a balk in the flood had struck it, and he was laughing weakly, helplessly, the laugh of a man who has been all the way to the edge of the dark and been let back, And when he saw Arabella come round the barn into the lantern light, he stopped laughing. And the two of them looked at each other for a long moment across the trampled mud, with the rain finally, at last, beginning to slacken. "You held the sluice too long," he said. "You wagered the valley on me. I heard the stone crack. You were a full minute past when Farrier told you to open." "I know exactly how long I was," said Arabella, and her voice was not level at all, it was shaking, and she did not trouble to hide it. "I was 2 minutes past. I nearly drowned the town for you. I who bought Ashmead to save 60 families from a proud man's canal, nearly drowned them all sooner than opened the gate while you were still under the water. So do not lecture me, your grace, on the reading of levels, for I have just made the worst judged, most reckless, least defensible decision of my whole managing life. And I made it for you, and I would make it again, and I have never in my life been so ashamed or so happy, and if you say one clever thing to me now, I will push you back into the flood myself." The Duke of Thornaby got to his feet. It cost him something with the arm, but he did it, because a man does not receive such a speech sitting down. He came to her across the mud, and he did not say one clever thing, having none left in him, and he took her cold face in his one good hand, and he said the plainest thing he had ever said in his life. "I bought your father's mortgage to protect you, and it was wrong, and it was the old sin wearing a new coat, and I knew it even while I did it, and did it anyway, because at the bottom of me there was still a man who thought it his to manage the world and spare you the trouble of your own affairs. That man went into the water tonight, Arabella, and I do not think he came out. I bring you the mortgage back. Not torn up, I would not insult you by tearing it up, as though your debts were mine to forgive. I bring it back to you, the paper and the assignment, to do with as you please, to pay in your own time out of your own purse, because your acres are yours and your battles are yours, and I will never again step in front of you as long as I live, but only if you will have me beside. I do not offer you a wall. I have seen you refuse a wall in an inn-yard before the whole county, and I never loved you so well as in that minute. I offer you the other thing, a shoulder to stand beside. I offer you my name, which is worth less than you, and we both know it, and my valley, which is half yours already and better managed on your side of the river, and every day of the rest of my life to spend proving that a man may be humbled without being made small, and made better by it, and glad. Marry me, Arabella, not for safety. You were never made for safety. Marry me because you have found, as I have found, that the whole thing is more interesting done together, and the flask goes further, and the heron is worth quarreling over. Marry me because I am asking at last and waiting for the answer, and I will wait as long as you make me, only do not, I beg you, tell me again that the distance does not close, for I have just swum a good part of it tonight and I am very cold." Arabella Sinclair looked up at him in the lantern light, in the ruin of the greatest flood in 40 years, with the water still running off both of them, and old widow Pashley cursing warmly in the barn behind, and the gray level guardedness that he had watched come down all winter degree by degree, came the whole of the rest of the way down at last, and what was under it was not a ledger and was not a level, but was simply a young woman who had carried too much for too long alone, and had found, against all her careful judgment, someone worth setting down the load beside. "Yes," she said, "you insufferable, high-handed, beloved man, yes, on one condition." "Name it. I have learned to my cost that your conditions are worth more than most men's gifts." "That you never again," said Arabella Sinclair, beginning helplessly to smile, the tears and the rain indistinguishable on her face, "tell your steward that women do not understand land. For I mean to understand yours to the last half-inch, Julian, and I mean to argue with you about every root of it for the next 40 years, and I will not be robbed of the pleasure by a husband who has learned his lesson too well and agrees with me. Keep a little of your pride, just enough to quarrel with. It is the thing I first liked in you, before I would admit to liking anything." "You have a bargain," said the Duke of Thornaby, and kissed her at last in the rain and the mud and the lantern light, and it was witnessed only by two exhausted navvies, a dry Scots engineer who looked studiously at the sky, and a deaf old woman in a barn who declared to her dying day that she had seen the Duke marry the Sinclair girl in a flooded field, and no one had ever believed her, though every word of it was true but the marrying, and the marrying came soon enough. They were married in June in the small church at Thornaby, under the new-cut flood mark on the wall that stood a hand above the old, with the whole valley crowded in to see it. The tenants she had saved and the tenants he had learned to mend for, old Good weeping without shame in the second pew and Mrs. Tarrant beside him. Peck standing very straight and looking once at his master with a countryman's license, a look that said plainly, "You have done, at last, the one wise thing," and had it answered by the ghost of the Duke's own smile. Ferrier came and complained about the acoustics. Sir Rowland Vane did not come, having sold up and gone to Bath, where a man may be florid among strangers, and no one missed him. The Dowager Duchess came. This surprised the county, which had laid wagers she would not. She came in her rustling black and sat in the front pew with her back like a poker, and she watched her son marry the nobody from Marefield with an expression no one could read. And afterward, at the breakfast, she drew the new Duchess of Thornaby aside, and the two formidable women stood a moment together by the long windows, and the county held its breath. "I told you," said the Dowager, "at the fair that you were not a possible thing." "You did, madam," said Arabella pleasantly. "I remember it fondly. It was excellent advice had I been a possible sort of woman." The old woman looked at her a long moment. Then something in the granite face shifted by a degree, no more the smallest yielding, the look of a general acknowledging that the field is fairly lost, and finding to her own surprise that she does not much mind. "My son has not laughed," she said, "since he was a boy. His father laughed the laughter out of him and then out of us all. He has laughed a dozen times this morning. I heard him." She paused. "I was wrong, Duchess. I am 81 years old, and I have been wrong perhaps 4 times, and I remember each of them, and this is the one I shall remember gladliest. See that he keeps laughing. It is the only tax I lay upon you. It is heavier than it sounds." "It is the one tax, madam," said Arabella, "that I mean to pay in full, every day, and never grudge and never finish paying." And the Dowager Duchess of Thornaby, who had not done such a thing in living memory, took the hand of the nobody from Marefield and pressed it once, and that was the whole of the peace between them, and it held. The canal opened the next spring, and it carried the coal cheap and clean to the river, and it made the estate rich in the tolls, exactly as the Duke had dreamed at his library table in the days of his pride. But he found, to his own quiet wonder, that the riches were the least part of it. The best part was the sluice. The great sluice at Ashmead they held jointly all their lives, by the covenants Halloway had drawn and Arabella had framed, neither able to work it without the other, and they never once wished it otherwise. And in every dry summer it fed the low meadows, and in every wet winter it spared the commons, and the 60 families grazed their beasts in peace under the shelter of a bargain struck between two people who had begun as enemies over the very water that now kept them. The Duke of Thornaby lived a long life and a full one, and he was known in the county, by the end of it, as a hard man softened, a proud man humbled and the better for it, a great landowner who sat the parish bench and mended his tenants' roofs and forgave more debts than he called in. And he knew, and said so freely, to anyone who would hear, that the whole of the change in him had walked into his estate room one gray morning in the shape of a steward saying the water-meadow is sold, and had poured him tea an hour later, and had beaten him twice before noon, and had spent the rest of his life beside him being, on every question of land and law and life that mattered, at least a half-inch cleverer than he was, and letting him keep just enough pride to quarrel with. And on winter evenings, when the work was done, the Duke and Duchess of Thornaby would walk out together to the low gate that gave upon the mere, where the whole thing had turned, and stand there in the last of the light with the escaped strand of her hair going gray now at the temple and his good arm about her, and watch the heron come in over the water they held between them. And she would call it her heron, as she always had, and he would gravely dispute it, as he always did, on grounds of the deed and the covenant and the half-inch of levels. And she would win the argument, as she always won, and he would concede it, laughing, the laughter his mother had heard and blessed. And the heron, who had never once tried to buy anything from either of them, and had witnessed the whole of it from the first gray morning to the last, would fold its wings and settle in the shallows of the mere, and the two of them would stand and watch it, cherished and cherishing, in the country they had learned at last to understand together.